WP-Get Web Dev tutorials for all user levels. Alright guys, so this is a follow-on from my previous tutorial on how to do these change background on hover sections with without any plugins. So this is just using JavaScript, pure JavaScript. So I've got a tutorial up from a couple of days ago. I'll put a reference in it to it in the description. This is a part 2 of that. So with the original one, I kept it very simple so that as soon as you roll your mouse over either of these columns here, which are sections, the background image of the main container would change. And I am using the Flexbox containers. I do all of my tutorials using that in the hope that that's going to come in the near future. If you wanted to adapt this for sections and columns, you could easily do so, but I'm demonstrating with the containers here. So all right, so I've just done a version 2 of this. So we start with a original image in the section background. When I roll my mouse over, it transitions in. So let's have a look at this top one here, for example. If I move my mouse over the first column, it'll just instantly change. Second column, instantly change. Third column, instantly change. Very easy to do. With this one here, when I roll my mouse over, it fades in and it does a little bit of a scale. It's just a little bit nicer effect, but it takes a little bit more work, which I'll take you through and show you. The other thing is that there was a comment on the YouTube channel asking what about mobile events. So what I've done here is added on both of these, bring up my Chrome DevTools. So on both of these, we've got mobile events. If I touch there, touch there, if I touch on this one, it changes. If I touch on that one, it changes. It's a bit in the way here, so I touch on the third one. So it's actually working for mobiles as well on the touch event. So that's just a small change, which I'll show you. Right, so heading over to the code. So on the original code, I've just rearranged it and I'll update my tutorial with this code. And the difference is what I've done is to change the image. I've just created a, where are we? Sorry, I copied and pasted and I messed up the spacing. So there it is there. So to change the image now, I've put that into its own function. So it's exactly the same code as previously to change the image, but I've just put it inside of a function, and I've got my mouse enter event, which I used last time, using that function as the callback, and just added the touch start so that we get the mobile on there as well. So that's the change I've made to the original. The new code down here, the change is the outer container. So where are we? I think it's this one here. Just call that V2. So this V2 container, I've got the class as I've added a V2 to the end of it. So it's container hover bg change V2. And then in here, in the code, I've just updated that. So this JavaScript is only referencing these V2 containers. That's exactly the same as previously. This up to here is exactly the same. Here's where it gets a little bit different. So with the containers, what we're doing up here is basically changing the background image on the container and setting the overlay on the actual container. So let me just go back to it. So if I look in here, I'm all over the place at the moment, so I'm going to slow this down a little bit. So back to the version 1, I've got my original background image, and I've got a background overlay just to darken up the images a little bit. Now that works with the containers here. I'm just going to bring the F12 up again. have a look at my outer container here. So what we have is a div which has a background image. So this background image here, and then we're using the before pseudo element to add the overlay. This is how the Elementor container works. So there's no additional DOM element, no additional div to add the overlay. That's actually in the same element, but using the before pseudo element. Now, you cannot access that before with JavaScript. I've looked at all sorts of different ways of doing it, and there is no way I can find where we can actually access that to change what it is. So with the new method, what I've done, I go to the new container. So I've got my standard element here, which is the background. I've got an initial background image. We can set that to whatever you want. And I've added 2 divs to it, and I'm doing this with JavaScript. So I'm adding one called BG hover top image, and then a BG overlay. So this BG overlay has got our transparency overlay there. So if I just go into here and move that up and down, I can change the darkness or brightness of that overlay. So that is a separate div that sits on top of the top image. Now, the way I've done this is when you roll over one of these columns, it's grabbing the background image and it's updating the background on this BG hover top image. So that one there. And then what I'm doing is to get the animation, I'm removing the show class and then re-adding the show class. And if we head to the code for this, so I'm going to go right through all this, but I'm just going to go to the basics first. If we head to the code for this, when it changes, what we want to do is to basically remove the show class. We then want to change the image on the background to the current image that we want. You have to use a set timeout here because we want to then add the show by removing and adding. If I just remove and add straight away, it doesn't trigger a CSS transition. So just a simple way, there may be other ways. My simple way is to set a timeout and then add the show back. And that will trigger the transition down here. So my background top image is basically starting as an image with center position, cover, and an opacity of 0. And a transform scale of 1.2. When we add the show class, it transitions to a opacity of 1, it's a transform of a scale of 1. The opacity transitions over 0.5 seconds and the transform over 1 second. So you can set these to whatever you like. And that's what gives us this transition here. So I'm going from a 1.2 scale with a 0 opacity to a scale of 1 with a opacity of 1. That's what's giving us the animation. Okay, so because we're doing this with separate elements, we've got to add those divs. So if we head up to the, so these two here are basically creating a top image and an overlay. Right? And all I'm doing with those is creating the elements and then setting the class on those. So we can reference those in our CSS down here. So that's all I'm doing there. And the reason I don't add them yet is because I want to iterate through all of the child elements here to get the triggers. If I add those before I do that, they're going to be additional elements. So it's going to look at the overlay and the top image as a trigger. And I don't want that to happen. So we could certainly change this by excluding those from the classes as we iterate through. We could put classes on each of these columns to, to only pick the ones out that we want as triggers. But I just thought it was easy enough to just not add these until we've actually picked up which of the triggers we want. And the easy way to do that is to basically get them ready, then go through and set up all of my trigger containers. And then once I've done that, then add the outer container, the overlay and the top image to the outer container, so the main container. That was the reason I've done that. All right, now in the array, the only thing that's different from the version 1 is where we're getting all the trigger containers, all these columns containers here, or whatever you want them to be. We're getting all those, and all I'm doing there is calling this change image, which I can actually change here. You're just realizing I can tidy this up even further. So I'm going to go through here, and all I'm going to do is put in the callback without a function. The residual of working stuff out. Now, because I've done that, this is going to throw a JavaScript error because change image hasn't been defined yet when I'm doing that. So I'm just going to grab my function from here and stick that before. I'll just put it up there. So it'll reiterate through every inner container. So every one of these, get the image from the data source, remove the show class, set the background on the top image, which will be this one here, the top image here that we're adding. Set the background on that. Set a timeout of 50 milliseconds, and then add the class show to that top image. And then all we're going to do down here is listen for the event. So when do we want this trigger change? On the mouse enter, and then on the touch start. The reason I've used mouse enter and touch start instead of mouse over and touch move is because when you roll your mouse over here, over one of these, when you enter it, so the mouse is entering into that, it triggers with the mouse mouse over. But as your mouse goes over other elements like the text, for example, it triggers additional events because the pointer events are actually picking up the this element here, and as you move away from it, it'll trigger another mouse move event, or mouse over event. So what we want to do is just find out when the mouse enters that area. I'm not worried about when it leaves because we're just going to leave the image as it is until we enter the next one. So mouse enter is basically just trigger when you enter that area. Don't worry about anything that happens while the mouse is inside that area. And same with touch start. As soon as you touch that area, I'm not interested in when the touch ends or when you move, just when you start the touch. All right, so that is pretty much the difference. The animation, very, very simple. All we're doing is going from as I said, a opacity of 0, scale of 1.2, to a opacity of 1, scale of 1 on the top image. Okay, and then what this is doing is this JavaScript here is listening for when the transition has finished. So once this transition has gone through to its end, so the transition end we're listening for, if the property is opacity, because what we want to do is when the opacity gets to 1, so the opacity over the 0.5 seconds has gone from 0 through to 1, what I want to do is get the outer container and change the style of the background image to whatever the current image is. And the reason I'm doing that is if we look at this here, so at the moment the background is this light, and if I hover over the center one, I've got this lady with the sunlight behind her, and I go hover over the next one, and I've got these trees in the background. What I want the opacity to change from when I'm moving from the lady here to the trees, I want the opacity to show some of the lady through, moving from the light bulb to the lady. I want some of the light bulb showing through. In fact, I might slow that down so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So if I go opacity of, say, this will be ridiculous. If I go transform of, that'll do. I'll just leave that as it is. So if I do this transform over 3 seconds, so initially transform, you can see the initial background image and then the light bulb. When I move over the second column, you'll see the lady opacity increasing over the light bulb. See the light bulb in the background there? When I move from the lady to the forest, you can see the lady transitioning to the forest. So that shift there is, to do that, what we have to do is the background image of that section has to be whatever the last image that transitioned was. So that's why at the end of the transition of the opacity, what we're going to do is take the outer container and make it the same image that we just transitioned to. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, so that is the new method that I've just come up with doing that. It's a little bit more complex than the previous one, which is why I wanted to do the easy one first. I'll put this up so you can copy and paste, and you don't really have to understand all of this to make it work. All you need to do is change your transitions that you want. If you want a different effect, you might have, you know, you want to transition from top to bottom, left to right, whatever you want to get to effect you want. So all you have to do is really change these transition properties. After you've pasted that in, get a section, put that class on the section, and then on each of these inner sections here, or column sections, same as the last one, we just need to go to the advanced, into, where are we? Why can't I see it? Advanced attributes, and set a data-bg-source src pipe, and then a relative path to the image that you want to transition to. Each of these has their own attribute for that. So this one is a different image, and that's all you have to do. So the difference between the previous version and this version is background processing of the images. You still construct this in exactly the same way with an outer container with the class on it. The inner containers that are going to be your triggers, and on each of those containers you need to set the attribute for the background that it's going to change to. So that's pretty much it. Or I hope that is something that you can use. And for me, I enjoy doing this kind of thing rather than using plugins, because it just gives you so much more control over it, and you know, you don't have the overhead of all the additional things that plugins might add. So yeah, let me know what you think. So if you enjoy this, please let me know. Like this video, subscribe to the channel so that I know what you like and I can do more. Thank you.